Most people who try to change their body believe the problem is discipline. They believe that if they could just eat less, move more, and stop giving in to cravings, everything would eventually click. And here's the number that stops that belief cold. A 2020 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that 80% of people who lose weight through conventional dieting regain all of it within 5 years. 80%. Not because they stopped caring, not because they were weak, but because the approach itself was working against the way the human body actually functions. There is a way of eating that flips the entire equation. That works with your biology instead of against it. That produces results most people assume require misery, restriction, and a complete personality overhaul. Today, I am breaking down exactly what happened when I tried it for 30 straight days. There is a number that dominates the health and fitness conversation in America. 2,000 calories. That is the daily intake printed on every nutrition label in the country, recommended by the FDA as the standard reference point for adult dietary needs. It sounds reasonable. It sounds scientific. But here is what that number leaves out entirely. The research on meal timing, fasting windows, and metabolic flexibility accumulated over the past 2 decades suggests that when you eat matters almost as much as what you eat. The 2,000 calorie standard tells you how much. It tells you almost nothing about when. And the when, it turns out, changes everything about how your body processes, stores, and burns what you give it. OMAD, 1 meal a day, sits at the most aggressive end of the intermittent fasting spectrum. 1 meal, 1 hour window. 23 hours of fasting every single day. When I first came across it, I did what most people do. I dismissed it immediately. I had spent enough time around conventional nutrition advice to have the rules memorized. Never skip breakfast. Keep your metabolism firing. Eat every 3 to 4 hours to maintain stable blood sugar. Graze. Don't gorge. OMAD violated every single one of those rules simultaneously. And my first instinct was that anyone promoting it was either misinformed or selling something. But the more I looked into the actual research, not the headlines, not the influencer content, but the peer-reviewed literature, the more I found something I was not prepared for. The science behind extended fasting was not fringe. It was not bro-science. It was published in journals I recognized, by researchers I could verify, producing results that directly contradicted what I thought I knew. So I stopped reading about it and started living it. 30 days. No cheat windows. Complete commitment. Before and after photos, same lighting, same time, same outfit. Real data, no highlight reel. The first 3 days were hard in a way I had not anticipated, and not for the reason most people expect. I was not starving. I was not lightheaded. I was not physically depleted in any measurable way. What I was profoundly uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with my body and everything to do with my brain. Because eating is not just a physiological event. It is a behavioral pattern, an emotional coping mechanism, a social ritual, and a daily structure, all compressed into something we do 3 to 6 times a day without thinking. When you remove that structure, the discomfort you feel is not your body asking for fuel. It is your brain running a program that no longer applies. The hunger I felt at 9 a.m. on day 1 was not physiological hunger. It was habit hunger. The memory of breakfast. My nervous system throwing a well-rehearsed tantrum because the schedule had changed. And once I understood that distinction, once I could name what I was feeling and separate it from actual physical need, the first week became something I could move through instead of something I had to escape. Something else happened in those first 3 days that most OMAD accounts leave out entirely. The amount of time I suddenly had was disorienting. Breakfast preparation and consumption had been consuming close to an hour of my morning every day without my registering it as a choice. When that disappeared, I was left standing in my kitchen at 7 a.m., with a black coffee and nowhere to be. That extra hour felt strange before it felt liberating. Change almost always does. By day 4, something shifted. The morning fog I had accepted as my baseline for years, that slow, thick mental haze that required 2 cups of coffee and an hour of warming up before I could think clearly, began to lift. I want to be precise here, because I am not describing some dramatic awakening. I am describing waking up and feeling neutral. Present. Not sluggish. Not behind. Just available to the morning in a way I genuinely could not remember experiencing as an adult. I sat down to work before 8 a.m. and actually worked. No scrolling, no easing in, no waiting to feel ready. And I wrote more in the first 2 hours of that morning than I usually produced before noon. I noticed it and was careful not to make too much of one good day. But the good days kept coming, not perfectly. Not without exceptions, but with enough consistency that by the end of week 1, I could not deny that something in my physiology had genuinely shifted. What was happening inside my body during those fasted hours is worth understanding, because the mechanism is not mysterious, it is documented and specific. When you stop eating, insulin levels fall. Falling insulin signals the body to stop storing energy and start releasing it from fat cells. Simultaneously, the body begins producing more norepinephrine, the hormone responsible for alertness, focus, and sustained energy. The brain, rather than running on glucose from a recent meal, begins converting to ketones, an alternative fuel source derived from fat that a growing body of research suggests the brain uses with exceptional efficiency. A landmark paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019, authored by neuroscientist Mark Mattson, documented that metabolic switching, the transition from glucose burning to fat burning, produces measurable improvements in cognitive function, mood stability, and cellular repair processes. I was experiencing those benefits in real time without fully understanding the science behind them. The clarity was not a placebo. It had a mechanism. What the research also documents is the role of growth hormone during extended fasting. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that a 24-hour fast can increase growth hormone secretion dramatically. The same hormone the fitness industry sells in expensive protocols. The body produces it in significant quantities in response to something that costs nothing. The most powerful lever had been sitting inside my own biology the entire time. Now here is where the OMAD experiment got genuinely surprising, and this is the layer that most people who dismiss fasting never reach, because they stop at the surface level of hunger management. By the middle of week 2, I noticed something I had not anticipated and would not have predicted. Freedom. Genuine, uncomplicated freedom that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with mental bandwidth. Every single day before OMAD, a significant and invisible portion of my cognitive energy was devoted to a constant low-level negotiation with food. What is for breakfast? Is there anything worth eating for lunch? Should I meal prep this week, or just figure it out as I go? Do I have time to eat before this call? Is it too early for dinner? That negotiation ran in the background of every morning and every afternoon, like an app I never closed. I had never noticed how much processing power it consumed until it went quiet. My mornings became mine. The first 2 hours of my day, which had previously been occupied by eating, planning around eating, or recovering from eating, became available for actual work. The shift in output was not subtle. My eating window was 5 to 6 p.m. every single day, and inside that window, I did not restrict. I did not suffer. I ate real food in real quantities, salmon with roasted vegetables, chicken and rice, full pasta dinners, a burger made at home with everything on it. I was not performing deprivation. I was compressing nourishment into a single window and giving my body 23 hours to do everything else it does when digestion is not the priority. The goal was never starvation. It was consolidation. And the difference between those two things turned out to be everything in terms of how sustainable this felt day to day. The body composition changes began becoming visible around day 18. I want to be precise about the timeline here, because I think health content does people a genuine disservice when it implies transformation happens faster than it does. The scale had moved, I was down 4 pounds at the 2-week mark, but what I noticed at day 18 was not a number. It was the way my clothes fit. My midsection was measurably tighter. My face looked leaner in a way that was subtle but real. People in my life noticed before I told them what I was doing, which is always the more credible data point. By day 30, I had lost 7 pounds total, but the number was the least interesting part of what the before and after photos showed. The after photo looked like someone who had been consistently taking care of themselves, not because of a dramatic physical transformation, but because of a visible change in posture, in the quality of the face, in the overall sense that something internal had settled. Here is a human comparison that crystallizes why OMAD produces results that conventional caloric restriction often doesn't. Consider 2 people eating the same total calories in a day. The first person eats those calories across 3 meals and 2 snacks, spread from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Their insulin spikes and falls repeatedly throughout the day. Their body never fully transitions out of fat storage mode because there is always incoming fuel to process. The second person eats the same total calories in a single 1-hour window. Their insulin spikes once, returns to baseline, and stays low for 23 hours. During those hours, the body depletes glycogen stores, transitions to fat burning, engages autophagy, the cellular cleaning process that removes damaged proteins and dysfunctional components, and runs repair processes that can only occur in the absence of incoming nutrients. Same calories. Completely different internal environment. Different hormonal signals. Different metabolic outcomes. The timing, not just the quantity, is doing significant biological work. My sleep changed in week 3 in a way I had not seen coming. I had spent years reading about sleep optimization, consistent bedtimes, cooler room temperatures, no screens before bed, magnesium supplements, and had tried most of it with marginal results. What OMAD did to my sleep without my even targeting it was more significant than anything else I had attempted. When your last meal is at 6 p.m., and you sleep at 10 p.m., your body has 4 hours to complete the initial phases of digestion before you go horizontal. You are not asking your system to simultaneously digest a late dinner and run the restorative processes of deep sleep. The result was measurable. I was falling asleep faster, staying asleep longer, and waking up without the heavy, unrestored feeling that had been my morning baseline for years. The hardest moment of the entire 30 days was not hunger. It was day 21. I was carrying accumulated work stress that in my previous life I would have managed, at least partially, with food. A midday snack that felt like a reward, a lunch that was as much emotional comfort as nutrition, a piece of chocolate at 3 p.m., because the afternoon was long and I deserved something. Those outlets were gone. And sitting with that stress, without the familiar reach for comfort, was genuinely uncomfortable in a way I had not prepared for. What I discovered in that discomfort, and this is the part I consider the most important insight of the entire experiment, is that I had been using food to manage my emotional state more extensively than I had ever acknowledged. Not in a dramatic way. In the small, constant, invisible way that most people do without naming it. OMAD did not just change when I ate. It forced me to develop other relationships with discomfort. And that process, while not always pleasant, produced a kind of emotional clarity I had not expected to find inside a dietary experiment. Day 12 had been hard for a different reason. A midday social event surrounded by food where I sat with sparkling water while everyone around me ate. Day 25, I made a deliberate decision to shift my window and eat dinner with friends, because human connection is also a biological need, And any protocol that cannot flex for the people in your life is not a protocol worth keeping. I did not spiral into guilt. I did not declare the experiment compromised. I returned to the protocol the next morning without drama. Because one adjusted day in 25 is not a failure. It is a human decision inside a sustainable system. The broader context that most health content never addresses is this. According to research published in the journal Metabolic Syndrome and Related Disorders, an estimated 88% of American adults show at least one marker of metabolic ill health: elevated blood sugar, excess abdominal fat, high blood pressure, or abnormal cholesterol levels. 88%. In that context, the conventional eating pattern, 3 meals plus snacks, heavily processed, constantly fueling, is not a neutral baseline. It is an active contributor to a metabolic crisis. OMAD is not a cure, but it is a meaningful intervention that works directly against the mechanisms driving it. Reduced insulin exposure, increased fat oxidation, enhanced cellular repair, better sleep, more stable energy. These are not small outcomes. And yet the reason most people feel like their health is beyond their control, despite access to more nutrition information than any previous generation, is not ignorance. It is environment. The food environment is engineered with extraordinary sophistication to produce constant hunger, constant craving, and constant consumption. Ultra-processed foods are specifically formulated to override satiety signals. Portion sizes have expanded dramatically over the past 40 years. Food is available everywhere, at all hours, at low cost, with maximum convenience. In that environment, the person who tries to eat less through willpower alone is not fighting their appetite. They are fighting a multi-billion-dollar industry that has studied their psychology more carefully than they have. OMAD works not because it requires more willpower, but because it removes the decision entirely. You are not resisting food all day. You are simply not in an eating window. The decision was made once. The rest is just waiting. By day 30, the before and after photos were sitting side by side, 7 pounds lighter, visibly leaner through the midsection, a posture that looked different, more upright, more settled, as though something in the relationship between my body and my sense of it had quietly shifted. Energy that stayed consistent from morning through early evening, without the 3 p.m. crater I had organized my entire day around for years. Sleep that I was genuinely looking forward to. A relationship with food that felt chosen rather than compulsive, and a level of mental clarity during the fasted hours that I had not experienced since my early 20s, and had not known I was missing until I found it again. Something the before and after photos could not capture was the shift in what hunger felt like by week 4. In the beginning, it was loud and insistent, arriving at predictable times, because those were the times my body had been trained to expect food. By week 4, that noise had quieted. Hunger became a background condition rather than a foreground emergency. That shift, from hunger as crisis to hunger as information, is one of the most practically valuable things I took out of the experiment. Hunger is not an emergency. It is a signal. Learning to hear it that way changes your relationship with food far beyond any single protocol. I am not telling you OMAD is for everyone. It is not. People with a history of disordered eating should approach anything involving extended fasting with a healthcare professional actively involved. People with type 1 diabetes, certain hormonal conditions, or specific athletic demands have real physiological reasons why a 23-hour fast may cause more harm than benefit. I mean all of that genuinely. What worked for my body, my schedule, and the specific version of stuck I was living in may not translate directly to yours. What I am telling you is this. I went in skeptical and came out genuinely changed. Not just in body composition, not just in the number on the scale, but in my understanding of what my body is actually capable of when I stop interrupting it every 3 hours. The clarity was real. The sleep was real. The emotional recalibration was real. And the quiet, uncomplicated freedom of a day that does not revolve around food was more valuable than I had any way to anticipate before I experienced it. The question I have been sitting with since day 30, the one that keeps expanding the longer I hold it, is the one I will leave you with. If this much available energy, this much cognitive clarity, this much ease inside your own body has been accessible to you the entire time, just waiting on the other side of a different relationship with food, what else have you been accepting as your normal that doesn't have to be?